Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of A.IdlePodcast, the podcast where I do weekly book reviews. First of all, welcome back. It's been about a month since my last episode, so this is officially the start of season 4, and I felt like it was appropriate to revisit a really interesting author who is Charlamagne the God, as I started the podcast with his second book, Shook One, Anxiety Playing Tricks on Me. So if you're interested in hearing more from him as an author, I would recommend that you go back to season 1, episode 1, and you can get some more information. Now, I am kind of reviewing these books out of order because this week I read Black Privilege, Opportunity Comes to Those Who Create It. And this was actually Charlamagne's debut back in 2017. Now, for those of you who are not familiar, Charlamagne is primarily a radio personality on The Breakfast Club, Power 105.1. You probably have heard a lot of his hot takes. He also has a podcast, the Brilliant Idiots podcast with Andrew Schultz. So he's a very unique personality, to say the least. But this book, I would say, is kind of like his written foundation by way of celebrity autobiography. And I say that because of the celebrities who choose to put out a book and author a book, the few that actually write more than one, the first book is kind of like their backstory, their childhood, their upbringing, and their start in whatever profession made them famous figures. So this is, essentially the same thing. Of course, we're going to break it down more than that, so hold tight. Now, before we get into the actual analysis, I really want to hit on the physical structure of the book. And we can't really talk about that without first addressing the title, Black Privilege. In order to wrap your head around what the meaning of that title is, we first have to talk about white privilege, which is what Black privilege is kind of playing off of. So white privilege is the notion that whiteness allows for certain privileges that are not accessible to non-white people. This is a topic that is highly controversial, and it's mainly because a lot of political analysts have made this, and politicians alike, have made this the discussion of debates on whether or not it exists. Now, that's not really what this book is about, but again, you have to understand what white privilege is in order to get into the meaning behind Black privilege. Now, according to Charlamagne, Black privilege is encouraging Black people to embrace the advantages that they do have and not to limit their story to oppression or struggle. Now, the suggestion that Black privilege even exists adds another layer to that discussion on white privilege. So this title will certainly catch a lot of eyes. And I think from both sides of the fence, if we're being honest, we'll be interested to read a little bit more. But, talking book structure, that's the first thing that readers see, especially if you're not familiar with the person and you're just walking through Target or scrolling through Amazon. The title is what's going to catch your attention. And so I think that they did a really great job in picking the title. And if you read the book, you know that the title was actually supposed to be something else prior. And for unrelated reasons, they had to go with something else. So this was the final decision. All right, so right after the title, we have the introduction, which is basically a frame story, which is literally a story being told within a story. And this is via flashback. So Charlamagne starts off the intro saying, "Picture this," and then describes the scenario. So if there was any question on who this book was about, this establishes Charlamagne as the main character. Now, in addition, another thing that I really enjoyed about the intro was that the principles, which are the chapter titles, they're outlined and they're also defined in the introduction so that you know what's coming, for the rest of the book. So this is kind of like a preface for the reader in order for us to understand because there are 8 principles, and some of them are, common sense. You can deduce what he is going to be talking about in more detail later on in the chapter, but some of them don't really seem to have a lot of meaning, or it just completely does not apply to a lot of people. So the first principle is it's not the size of the pond, but the hustle of the fish. The second is PYP, not PYT. There are no pretty young things in this book besides myself. Well, on this episode, anyway. So PYP stands for pick your passion, poison, or procrastination. Number 3 is F your dreams. Number 4 is there are no losses, only lessons. Number 5 is put the weed in the bag. Number 6 is live your truth. Number 7 is give people the credit they deserve for being stupid. And number 8 is access your Black privilege. And so what these principles are doing, it's really telling the chronological story of Charlamagne's success. And throughout the chapters, there are occasional footnotes that elaborate on situations or characters or slang. But another function of the principles being outlined in the introduction is that if you are one of those shoppers that picks up a book and you read through the first, 5-10 pages, you'll be able to get that paragraph of information explaining what exactly principle 5 is, which is put the weed in the bag. How does that apply to anyone other than drug dealers? He actually does a really good job of kind of bringing that home, because I was super confused when I saw that title. And lastly, he has an acknowledgements section at the end of the book. Honestly, I don't know why he needed this, because Charlamagne is very good about shouting out the people that impacted his career, his life, his mentors, the people that gave him a chance throughout the entire book. So I didn't feel like the acknowledgements section was necessary, but authors use that section to show appreciation for any and everyone that they feel had a hand in either helping them or even just making the book, published or whatever. So I know why it's there, but you'll see it when you read this book. He shouts out everyone. So it's just really funny. Okay, so writing style, obviously this is Charlamagne writing a story about Charlamagne, so it's first person narration, and we get a lot of reflection throughout the book. Again, we have those flashbacks that he explains to us, and then he goes even deeper to discuss the lessons that he learned from those situations, whether it was in the moment or maybe years down the line. Charlamagne has a very specific tone, and not necessarily literally, but if you listen to him on the radio or if you've seen any viral clips from the Breakfast Club, you know that he has a personality, okay? And oftentimes I'm worried that people who are not accustomed to writing professionally for a living will lose their personality in the pages. And that can come from a variety of reasons. Oftentimes there are ghostwriters because, if you're not an author or a writer by nature, you need to have someone to help you through that process, or even editors. And so I was very happy to see that Charlamagne maintained who he was throughout these pages. He himself labeled his tone as raw in the introduction. And I mean, at the very least, this shows that he's self-aware. I think that a great example of his tone is how he describes his plethora of firings. I think it illustrates his writing formula, actually. And first of all, for anyone to come out and acknowledge that they were fired 4 times, and that's just counting the radio firings, he was fired from a few other places, that shows a level of vulnerability, but it's also real. He's not hiding anything. He's not trying to play it like he was the victim or like he didn't deserve it. He was honest and open about the situation, but unfortunately it was really kind of funny to read and sad. But I think that his way of describing, oh, and here's the next job I got fired from, or whatever, it's just so Charlamagne. And it was nice to read. I I thought it was really funny. I'm sorry. Because it's like the situations surrounding most of his firing was not funny, but just to hear him say, yeah, on to the next one, it's just, so him, such his personality. Also, if you needed just another example of Charlemagne's tone and how he maintained his self throughout this book, this man called DJ Vlad a friend and a culture vulture in the same sentence. He clearly doesn't care. And that's what we love about him. So I appreciate him maintaining his self, while writing this book. And it's not watered down. It doesn't sound like anyone else's words. And lastly, when it comes to writing, I noticed that Charlamagne uses a lot of one-liners and quotes, and I think that that's a product of his time on the radio. Obviously, you have a limited time when you're on the radio. You have to run advertisements and you have to do interviews and segments and things like that. So if you want your thoughts to be heard, you have to make sure they're concise enough that people won't automatically tune you out, but also have meaning to it. So one little statement I pulled out from the book was, change is the basis of growth, and growth is the basis of life. These little bits of wisdom that are short like that will stick with people. Even if they don't remember anything else, thinking of a quote or something like that, that'll help reinforce, their positive behaviors down the line. Okay, theme time. So obviously, the main theme here is profession, his career journey. Starting from the humble beginnings, he lived on a literal dirt road in Moncks Corner, South Carolina, which aligns with the notion that there's no elevator to success. This is not someone who was born into wealth or born into a family with connections. He really had to work and get it out the mud. And this kind of weaves into his professional direction, or I guess you can call it misdirection. Principle number 3, F your dreams. Charlamagne was a rapper before he became a radio personality. And this is an example of, I don't want to call it a distraction, because at the time he really thought he was going to be a rap star, but it wasn't his path. And so being able to have his mentor's encouragement to lock into the energy that he had created with his internship for a radio station was life-changing, because oftentimes we're so focused on wanting something, and Charlamagne talks about this in the F Your Dreams principle. You want something because everyone else wants it, or everyone else, you see it on TV, but he had a real gift for radio. And so just having his perspective shift from saying, look, you really can't rap that good and you're not going to make it very far, to you've created a buzz and you're an intern, or you're a part-time person who's only on for a few hours a week, ride that wave and let that take you to success. That's really important. And I think that my generation, I think we're aware of the impact that mentors can have on your drive, really, because it does get difficult to kind of keep going and keep working, especially with the pandemic. People are burned out. And so to be able to have someone, not necessarily like in your close circle, but someone who knows how you work and knows your strengths and your weaknesses, be able to just give you some type of guidance, it's really impactful, and it changed Charlemagne's life. Of course, throughout this career journey, he had those pit stops in the middle, which included the firings, but also, included him having some side jobs that were kind of intermittent, nothing really serious. But I wanted to highlight this because while he was, on the radio doing what he really enjoyed doing, he wasn't paid much. So he had to take on extra work. And this really rings a bell, because a lot of creatives are, whatever they may be doing, whether it is content creation or it's entrepreneurship, chances are at the very beginning, you're not making a lot of money. And so oftentimes you do find yourself working retail or fast food, and it becomes discouraging. But you have to really remain focused and, again, lock into that energy. Charlamagne also talks about education and training in relation with career paths and profession. And he said that no amount of classroom instruction can ever match the experience you'll get from actually performing a job, which I think is absolutely true. Depending on your job, however, obviously, if you want to be a doctor, you need to go to school so you don't kill somebody. But like if you want to be a radio personality, it's not. No one said you had to go to journalism school. You might have to work a little bit harder to get connections, but I think that's one thing that stops a lot of people. I didn't go to school for this. I didn't go to school for that. I can't start a career in that. I already graduated college with a, psychology degree or a business degree. How am I supposed to get into what I want to do? Well, you just do it, and you'll get that training, and it may come from an unpaid internship at first, or it may come from a part-time position at first, but it'll eventually lead to something bigger if you maintain your passion and your drive and your work ethic. And lastly, just the whole idea of Charlamagne succeeding towards the end of the book, obviously. I think that Charlamagne's main pull is that it actually comes from one of the 48 laws. I don't remember which one, but it's the idea that you create a spectacle. And it's not that Charlamagne himself is a spectacle, but it's just that even in his early days on the radio, and not even his early days, like 2014 when I started listening to them, he was wild and he was asking wild questions. And granted, they're the questions that we all wanted to hear answers to, but what did it do? It created a spectacle and it went viral. And so he always has a lot of attention on his takes on different things, whether it's people that hate him for it or people that really enjoy his commentary. He has made a business out of being himself. And so he really latched into that. And he continues to maintain his position throughout just all of the knowledge that he's learned over the years. So, okay, second theme, of course, is lessons learned. The idea of renaming the chapters as principles, it shows that he pulled the principles out of his misfortunes as well as his achievements. And so it really displays his stage of understanding throughout his career. So as you're on this career journey, you're going from stage 1 to stage 8, you're seeing all of the lessons that he's learning and the jewels that he's pulling out for us to follow along with. I think the overall lesson of this book and the overall principle, honestly, is just mindfulness. And one thing that kept sticking out to me is, again, when he was discussing his firings, he would often say, I didn't put too much emotion into it because I did what I was supposed to do. I did my job. I did everything I was supposed to do. So I know that I will be blessed down the line, or I will get another job, another radio position down the line. And that takes a lot of strength, because if you ever have been fired, or even if you've quit somewhere and you don't want to be there, but it's hard. It's really hard to sit there and say, I failed at something, and to keep going, especially in the career path that you're going in, that's tough. And so for him to not even kind of cry about it, be angry about it, he's just looking forward. That's some really strong, what's the word? Strong perseverance, maybe? It takes a lot to be able to center yourself like that. And I think a lot of us let emotions overcome our actions often. But that is a perfect example of someone who is completely focused on longevity and not just, one position. All right, last theme is, of course, privilege. And so this entire book is really It's addressing the philosophy of accessing your privilege. Everyone has privilege. And I love the way that he explained this. Whereas, if you're healthy, you have health privilege. There are a lot of people that are not, doing so well with their health, and it's impacting their everyday life. And they're looking at terminal illness and all types of tragic things. There's also people that don't have, their legs or their arms. And so if you do, then you have limb privilege. If you're someone who is very, very book smart, you have that privilege. Everyone has some type of privilege. And just because you may not notice it, like for example, if you've had legs all of your life, you're not really thinking about the fact that there are some people that have to live without legs. You have to really treasure and address the privilege that you do have. And so I like that he broke it down like that, because no one wants to admit that they have privilege, because no one wants to admit that someone else is worse off than them. I think a lot of people like to be held in low regards, so that they can make excuses for themselves as to why they didn't accomplish, X, Y, and Z. But listen, you're doing a little bit better than someone else. So think about that thing and let that be your motivation. All right, and just a few motifs before my review. So religion is a big motif here, and it's interesting because we're not just talking about one religion here, we're talking about a few. So Charlamagne was raised Jehovah's Witness, and this really impacted his childhood, mainly because he wasn't able to indulge in holiday presents and things like that, whereas his friends were at school. That's the one thing that he talked about. But also his encounter with the 5%ers, which I had never heard of. I've read up on the Nation of Islam, but I'd never heard of the 5%ers before. But I enjoyed his commentary on the correlation between the 5%ers and hip hop. This being that both of these groups have the gift of gab, because if you're familiar with the Nation of Islam, then you know that oftentimes they would speak and teach on the corners in New York. And in order to capture an audience in New York, you have to have some type of wit. And so that comes with, again, putting words together, sometimes concisely, so that the message can be heard, quickly, but also so that it's impactful. And this is something that, hanging around these guys, he was able to kind of pick up on. And so it really all makes sense that Charlamagne is, so heavy in the radio industry right now, because he had a lot of influences, including hip hop and the 5%ers around him, that verbally, were able to articulate themselves well and be impactful at the same time. And also, I wanted to mention that with the 5%ers thing, after reading James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time, he talked about how he paid attention to the Nation of Islam because of the way that they presented themselves when speaking on, whatever topic that they were addressing during the day on the corner. And so it shows the power of being able to communicate verbally, and how, especially back then when, smartphones weren't really a thing, standing outside on the corner and just projecting and having the right what's the word I'm looking for? The right words to say in order to really land the message. It's really important. Now, Charlamagne doesn't claim any one religion, but he is someone who obviously learns from many, but he maintains his personal connection with God and spirituality. Hip hop, of course, if you listen to my Shook One episode, you know that hip hop is something that has inspired Charlamagne in his early years, and it continues to. Obviously, there's going to be Jay-Z references. There's also ludicrous references, Biggie. There's a lot of hip hop lyrics in this book as well as in Shook One. And so these are the famous figures who inspired Charlamagne when he was younger, when he was reading the magazines, and obviously he wanted to be a rapper to be like them, but now he references a lot of them, on the radio. Obviously, it's kind of like a hip hop R&B station. But that's something that is very prevalent throughout this book. And lastly, I just wanted to touch on the dynamic that Black men have with their fathers, because this is the third book that the stories about Charlamagne's dad is wild. Is wild. I think it was in this book that he said his dad, what team is he a fan of? Okay, no, I have to look this up because if I misquote this, it's going to be bad. I think it's the Cowboys. Yeah, it's the Cowboys that his dad is a fan of. And I think they only had 5 Super Bowl rings, but his dad got 6 of them tattooed on himself, saying that he was speaking it into existence. Like, this is some wild stuff. This is crazy, but it reminded me of Kevin Hart's stories with his father. And then I also started reading Will Smith's book, and he was talking about his relationship with his father. So I just think it's wild how wild these fathers are and how driven and successful their sons became. Not because, there was a lack of motivation. It just seems very dysfunctional. Like, it doesn't seem like a great relationship, but the stories are hilarious though. So if you're interested, I would definitely read Kevin Hart's I Can't Make This Up. And eventually I'm going to review Will Smith's book, but this is a good one so far as well. So I want to talk about Shook One because I see Charlamagne's written progression throughout both books. Black Privilege opens with a few sentences, at the top of the chapters from Charlamagne the God, whereas Shook One opens with a quote from an influential figure. So that goes back to the point, less words, more impact. But the way that he structured his chapters are very similar to the way that it was in Shook One. So you can still see that, how he wants to present everything is still there. He's just tweaking along the way. Black Privilege also includes God Jewels, and that's just, his interpretation of lessons condensed into a few lines, whereas Shook One kind of expounded on this with the clinical correlations by Dr. Ish Major, and that ended up being a more substantial part of the book. But you can really see how Charlamagne is rocking with this writer's path, and he's molding each book to be a little bit, I don't want to keep saying impactful, but that's the word. I mean, I don't know. It's great. I'm kind of upset that I read it out of order, but it did help me recognize the differences, but also the Charlamagne's uniqueness and his words, how they really are kind of locked into the same energy, but he's just crafting, his editing skills or his written skills, whatever. So Charlamagne is very clear as far as author intention. He wants to pass on the valuable lessons and principles that he's learned, and that's established in the introduction. He also wants the audience to kind of take away from this book, as bad as he was, Charlotte still managed to turn it around. And honestly, when it comes to why people like books about celebrities, it's because of that. Because the early misadventures that celebrities have give people hope. And it's interesting for people to see, because when you're already familiar with someone who is in a position of success, who has achieved a lot in their field, to hear that they went through, tough times, or they had doors slammed in their face or scripts rejected or whatever it may be, and now they're on top, that is inspiring. And that is essentially why people enjoy reading these books. I think in addition to Charlamagne's lessons, though, there are practical lessons which bolstered Malcolm Gladwell's message from Outliers, basically there are events outside of Charlamagne's control that did contribute to his success. And I think that his story is a good example because it's not that he was just always at the right place at the right time. He worked hard, but he also, harnessed those external events, so that he can ride it in his favor. And two quotes that represent that are straight from the book. This unwittingly changed the course of my life. Or here's a second situation that also changed the course of my career. Situations that had nothing really to do with Charlamagne's control. They just happened and he took advantage of that. So if you ever had any doubts about Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers, I would recommend reading this book because it is a practical lesson in that. I think some people, when it comes to the messaging of Outliers, think that if you're not in a specific place, in a specific time, you're never going to be successful. But that's not, what he was saying. He's just saying that hard work is a portion of success, but there's also other things that affect, your success level as well that are outside of your control. So is this a reread? Of course. It's inspirational. It's funny. But I also think it's a great business reference guide, specifically on, managing yourself, but also having someone manage you, negotiation tactics, as well as experience. He talks a lot about having unpaid experience, or even just observing the interns that he has around him at the Breakfast Club and how their work impacted their ability to get a job afterwards. So I think that, again, a lot of people need that kind of gem when it comes to motivation, because sometimes it's tough, especially straight out of college. But he certainly does give good advice when it comes to that. And I just want to say, Charlamagne has an inclination to comics and superheroes. I think he should write a fiction book next. I mean, I'm all down for the nonfiction books, and I'm looking forward to more. I'm pretty sure he said he was going to release more books. He should, he's good at it. But for someone who, is in that world of superheroes and Marvel and comics and all that stuff, he should just write a fiction book. Also, Charlamagne, if you're listening, you need to bring back Comic Kings because we need you. It's been 3 years? We need your recaps on everything that's happened in the MCU since then. So just saying. But anyway, the only takeaway I have from this is Principle 2 has the best message ever. PYP. Pick your P. Pick your struggle. Okay, because none of it's going to be easy. And I think I saw a meme of this on Instagram or something, but it's so true. You can choose to be broke. You won't have to go to work, but you also don't have any money. You can choose to be successful and rich, but you're probably going to be working a lot harder than you thought you had to. You can be an entrepreneur, but you're probably going to be working around the clock. Or you could have a 9-to-5 and really dislike most of your coworkers. So pick what you want to do. That's not exactly what Charlamagne's message was, but I think it's really important for everyone to recognize that no matter what you pick, you're going to have to deal with some cons. There's no, sparkly special spot where you get to have your cake and eat it too. So pick your poison, pick your procrastination, or pick your passion and deal with the consequences. And that's it. So I will see you guys next week for another episode. Thank you for tuning in. I'm so happy to be back after a month. And I hope everyone has a great weekend. I will see you next week. Thank you.